Currently, I still see quite often that some people think it's nice that we're going up right now and all, but it will never be a bull run like the one a few years ago, where the altcoins skyrocketed and Bitcoin really entered an overheated zone. And today, we're going to look at two important things. Then we'll take a look at Bitcoin to see what problems there are. And then we'll just take a general look at what's going on right now. Because you need to understand that it's much more important. But before we continue, feel free to leave a like and a comment on the video. I would really appreciate it. These videos are a lot of work. And if you now assume, hey, will we ever see another bull run like in 2021, like in 2017, where it really felt like we were only going up, where everything was skyrocketing, and where crypto bubbles still looked like this, over 24,000%, over 18,000%, and so on. Will we ever see something like that again? A very interesting question. But to answer that, you have to understand the cycles. With Bitcoin, we have the 4-year cycles, and so far the 4-year cycles have always been accurate. Now, don't come at me with something else about why they won't be accurate this time, because every 4 years, I hear out of nowhere, hey, because of this and that, the 4-year cycle doesn't exist, and so on. Every time retail investors try to come up with something new as to why, all of a sudden, there supposedly isn't a 4-year cycle anymore. There are also cycles in the real world, economic cycles, where stocks or an expansion of money supply takes place. And just look at the period we're in right now. From 2023 to 26, there will be an expansion of the money supply, and that's exactly what we're currently seeing. These are the years when you make big money. Right now, that's absolutely true. These are economic cycles that have worked pretty well in the past too. These economic cycles don't just happen by chance. By the way, that's also the reason why Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin, built in this halving effect back then, is because he knew very well, that in the real economy, we always have 4-year cycles of monetary expansion and contraction. He knew this very well, and accordingly, he adjusted this halving effect and in Bitcoin, on which we still use today. As a result, Bitcoin becomes scarcer, and over the long term, the price will rise. Now, you have to understand what kind of phase we are currently in. In the past weeks and months, we were in a risk-on phase. You can see that very clearly in this chart. What kind of chart is this? This is the gold chart. Yes, you heard that right. We're even including the gold chart now, because people only flee to gold when there is significant risk in the real economy. And that's exactly what we've seen in recent months. Everyone fled into gold, but now it looks like we've reached the top and are starting to drop. And because we've dropped here, and we've immediately seen that Bitcoin and the crypto market have performed really well. Accordingly, gold has shown us that we've been in a very risky environment over the past few months. And now, with the drop, we can simply see that the risk is gradually subsiding and people are starting to invest again. But now, Bitcoin is facing entirely different problems because we're getting closer and closer to a supply shock. This also affects the altcoins, because just take a look at this. Whenever we see a breakout in Bitcoin, we usually see a breakout in the altcoins about 2 weeks later. Every time Bitcoin has to perform first. After that, the altcoins follow. They also rise quite nicely afterwards. We've noticed that in the past few weeks as well. The altcoins have followed, but usually with a delay of about 1 or 2 weeks. That's why everything related to Bitcoin is also very closely connected to the altcoins. It's also the case that during a bull run, we see a drop in Bitcoin dominance when there's a big breakout. Just like here. Here we had a major Bitcoin breakout, which you can hardly even recognize anymore. And if you zoom in a bit closer, you can see it. But here we had a major breakout in Bitcoin, and it was exactly at this point and in March 2017 that we saw a drop in Bitcoin dominance. That means it's extremely important that Bitcoin performs first. Bitcoin needs to be overheated so that the altcoins can follow. Here in 2021, in the last cycle, it was exactly the same. Here in December 2020, we had a really massive Bitcoin breakout. And when did Bitcoin dominance start to drop? In December 2024. That's why it's extremely important that we reach an overheated Bitcoin for an alt season, and nowadays we can achieve that faster than ever before. Because, it's clear the Bitcoin supply on exchanges keeps decreasing. By now, probably everyone is familiar with this chart. That's extremely positive, because the fewer Bitcoins we have, the higher the price can obviously go. Supply and demand. I don't need to explain that to you. But what people tend to forget at this point is simply this fact. Bitcoin also has little kits, OTC desks. That's the liquidity that is mainly bought by people like MicroStrategy or ETF investors. That means they're not buying Bitcoin from the open market. They're basically buying it under the table. That's what it's called, because they transfer money to someone. And that person sends the Bitcoins directly to their wallet. If they were to buy it on the open market, on Binance or wherever, it would have a much greater price impact. But as we can see, there are fewer and fewer OTC-wise here. Take a look. I mean, in the 2021 cycle, we still had almost 500,000 Bitcoins in the OTC wallets here. Nowadays, that's barely just 100,000 Bitcoins. 100,000 Bitcoins is really not a lot. So we're seeing a massive shortage here as well. And now you have to take a look at this. To increase Bitcoin by 2% on Binance, as you can see here in this area, we need $60 million. So if we pump $60 million into Bitcoin all at once, Bitcoin goes up by 2%. And you all know, MicroStrategy sometimes buys Bitcoins with 2 or 3 billion at a time. Of course, he buys it OTC. That's obvious. But I've now done a calculation to see what would happen if MicroStrategy invested $2 billion into Bitcoin. I hope this is understandable here. Here we have the result. If MicroStrategy were to pump $2 billion into Bitcoin all at once, under the current market conditions, we would have a price today of $171,000. So a Bitcoin price of $170,000. Of course, this is only theoretical because we also have sell orders at certain levels, and there would be many people who would sell immediately. But just so you understand what's actually happening here, Bitcoin is rising continuously. This is happening because the supply is becoming increasingly scarce. However, the people who are buying Bitcoin here are not buying it on the exchanges. No, they're buying it OTC. The brilliant thing is, in the coming months, it will become increasingly difficult to get hold of OTC Bitcoins. That means at some point, they'll be forced to buy Bitcoins on the exchanges. And when that happens, I'm telling you, price targets of $200,000 or $300,000 are not impossible, because you can see the price impact that just $2 billion would have on Bitcoin here. That's absurd. And if I now show you that, especially in the past few months, retail investors have been selling while the big investors have continued buying. If I show you that we currently have absolutely no retail presence in the AI market, which you can really notice everywhere right now, then things get really interesting. Once we slowly start to see the retail market return, when it becomes increasingly difficult to get Bitcoins OTC, and we find ourselves in this phase of euphoria, what do you think kind of price impact that will have? That would trigger a bull run on steroids. That's something you need to understand here. We're seeing an increasingly severe shortage of Bitcoin, and soon there will be nothing left to get OTC. When the big investors, MicroStrategy, the states, and the ETFs have to buy from the exchanges, that's when things will get really interesting. And then we'll finally see that supply shock, as we've been talking about for years, is just crazy when you really understand all of this. The OTC desks are getting emptier, and the Bitcoin reserves on the exchanges are shrinking more and more. So far, we are nowhere near the retail market levels we saw in previous years. You don't even want to imagine what will happen if we get a huge influx of retail investors again. And then it could really lead to a supply shock. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is suddenly going to 500,000 or anything like that. No, I don't want to exaggerate now, but such a supply shock does exist and has happened in the past. We saw it with Ripple. Back then, XRP even overtook Bitcoin. A lot of people don't even know that. That was in 2018. And I think XRP is also the only currency that has ever overtaken Bitcoin. Take a look at that. For a short time, just a few hours, and then XRP overtook Bitcoin. And that was only because we had a supply shock here. I mean, just look at that. I think you can see it too. That was an absolute supply shock. Out of nowhere, things escalated like that. And we saw such price targets with XRP. All of this was because of the supply shock. But don't let yourself be misled by the supply shock now. With Bitcoin, we can also see that it's building up slowly, step by step, that there are fewer and fewer Bitcoins. And that we're rising continuously. And that's just beautiful. And the later Bitcoin dominance drops, the more money will be left over for the altcoins. In that regard, I'm definitely optimistic. Yeah, and there's really not much more to say. Feel free to leave your opinion in the comments. And with that, I'd say see you next time. Bye.